Imagine toxins and contaminants running through your taps. Imagine bathing in it. Imagine giving a glass of it to your child. Imagine that here, in Canada. For many Indigenous communities, this is the reality. When this issue is brought to the attention of Canadians, focus typically falls on the existence of drinking water advisories. However, the criteria for drinking water advisories does not capture the full scope of unclean water problems. Data from a national database reveals that overall risk scores that indicate health risks associated with unclean water have not changed much since 2015. Despite current government action plans to eliminate long-term drinking water advisories, many Indigenous communities have serious water issues without ever having been issued a drinking water advisory. In order to drink, wash, cook, bathe, and perform other hygienic practices, Indigenous people have higher costs financially, as well as higher costs due to time and energy constraints. Unclean and unsafe water leads to sick people. Direct health implications include, but are not limited to, increased risks of cancers, depression, and skin infections. Spiritual health is affected as well, as some Indigenous groups view water as a sacred symbol of life. In terms of what perpetuates the system, it begins in the period of colonialism, and particularly when the remote locations of reserves were established. Remoteness contributes to water problems in multiple ways. Along with other past actions such as attempts at cultural genocide and disputes on land claims, the oppression of Indigenous peoples is part of the history of Canada. Actors in the private sector, especially in the extraction industries, also exacerbate the problem through producing pollution or reducing the available supply of water. The federal government has the responsibility to ensure the well-being of Indigenous people and their lands. Yet problems persist in the bureaucratic delays, avoidance of accountability, and a lack of consideration for Indigenous knowledge and values. Our research has also revealed that financial support, infrastructure, and training, federally provided, has proved to be inadequate. A lack of public awareness and misconceptions of Indigenous people are also part of the problem, as it entails that issues get inconsistent support from the wider public.
All of these key findings helps maintain a system that perpetuates the water crisis. Now we'll move on to key findings. One of the most important key findings from our research was that the removal of drinking water advisories alone cannot solve the water crisis. This is particularly worth noting because it was the exact opposite of our initial assumptions. When we began our research, we used the removal of DWAs to measure the success of the government clean water initiatives, and as the end goal for all Indigenous reserves experiencing the water crisis. However, as we previously stated, even when the DWAs have been removed, many Indigenous communities will still suffer poor water quality and accessibility issues. This demonstrates that DWAs are simply a part of the bigger issue, and their removal is not a sufficient indicator that a community's water crisis has been solved.
The main lessons we've learned from our research is that the relationship between the Canadian federal government and the Indigenous people is still strained, the current funding from the federal government is insufficient, and several actors need to be involved in order to provide a sustainable solution. The strained relationship is a significant factor that exacerbates the water issue because communication, mutual respect, and a better understanding of lived Indigenous experiences are missing. Indigenous communities also still lack decision-making power. Furthermore, despite the billions of dollars already spent on the water issue, funding from the federal government still falls short of what is actually required to fix the water crisis for good. While the role of the federal government is key, we cannot only rely on the government's efforts to solve this problem. As highlighted previously, several other actors are involved in the system, which include extraction companies and mainstream media that all uniquely contribute to the issue. Efforts are required from these actors, and more, in order to address those unique contributing factors. However, Indigenous people themselves need to be at the center of these efforts. Therefore, a favorable solution will arise from more respectful and successful relationships between all actors involved that meaningfully incorporates Indigenous perspectives, voices, and values throughout the problem-solving process. Moving forward, we should ask how these actors can help facilitate Indigenous-led clean water initiatives. Systems thinking has allowed us to identify and connect the relationships between all of these different actors, which made us realize that there are several points of levers for change within a system, and not just one. We leave you, the audience, with one final thought. If you have clean water, then why don't they?